Okay. Is this working? Yeah, I think so. Okay. We're still waiting for one of the speakers who is stuck in traffic, but I think we need to get going because, as you know, this event is hybrid, and there are people online who are waiting for us to kickstart the discussion. So, good morning, officially, and a warm welcome to this hybrid EPC policy dialogue organized in the context of the Reinventing Engagement through Affirmative Citizen Consultations project, otherwise known as REACH, a project funded by the European Commission's European Education and Culture Executive Agency. Now, over the past 2 years, the REACH project has taken citizens from the EU member states and candidate countries on a uniquely deliberative journey. They reflected on what justice, trust, and participation mean at a time when democratic norms are visibly under strain, and when Europe's credibility depends on its ability to renew the social contract from ground up. Today, we will launch the REACH transnational report and ask what Europe can learn from its citizens and how their ideas can inform policy making, from the design of the green transitions to the strengthening of democratic institutions. What's remarkable about REACH is not only its scope, spanning rule of law, environmental protection, and participatory democracy, but also its composition, because REACH brought together voices from across Europe's different realities, from the EU's core and periphery, from member states and EU aspiring countries alike. And despite their diversity, citizens' concerns converged strikingly around two expectations: fair governance and accountability on the one hand, and sustainability and responsibility on the other. This conversation is particularly timely. The European Commission's 2025 Enlargement and Rule of Law reports again underline how credibility, both internal and external, rests on delivering justice, trust, and sustainability together. REACH offers citizens' own blueprint for that type of renewal. And to learn about this blueprint and to discuss on its basis, I have a terrific lineup of speakers, including, well, I'll take it in the order from my right, Igor Bajok, trainer and consultant at the Association for Civil Society Development, Smart Croatia.
Thank you.
Yes, well, we will have here Ioanna Giakoumopoulou, project manager for the REACH project at ELIAMEP. I hope she will be with us shortly. We have Camille Doblesr, head of research at Publiques. We have Martijn, Quinn, deputy head of unit in the Directorate-General for Environment at the European Commission. And last but certainly not least, we have Blerta, Hoxha, who is program manager for Western Balkans at International IDEA. Thank you all very much, really, for accepting our invitation. We will first hear from our speakers, and then I will open the floor for questions and comments. But before we proceed, I would like to invite Milos Pavković, who is Chief Strategist at the European Policy Center Belgrade and researcher in this project, to pave the way for our discussion on behalf of the organization who coordinated REACH, which is CEP Belgrade. Milos, REACH set out to reinvent how citizens are consulted and how their input feeds into real policy processes. From your perspective, what does this project tell us about citizens' priorities and about what kind of Europe they want to see?
Thank you, Corina. It's my honor to be here today and to present key findings of this 18 months long initiative, during which we had a various set of events, local, national, and transnational consultations. I have a short presentation, so I will just ask the technical staff to prepare my slides. We can go to the next slide. So, as I mentioned, and as you already mentioned, we actually wanted to somehow collect the inputs, insights, findings, findings, and what is the most important, concrete policy recommendations, policy proposals developed and co-created by citizens during the course of this project in the transnational volume. So this transnational volume covers more than 71 concrete policy proposals across 7 countries in which the project was implemented. Next slide, please. Why we wanted to do citizens consultations? I'll just start there. So when we were thinking about this project and what we want to do with citizen consultations, we actually was thinking about a series of issues that are burdening our societies and our democracies. We are seeing crisis of the representative democracy these days, rise of populist politicians and populist movements. In parallel, very low turnouts and on elections, and very low participation of citizens in everyday decision and policy making. And also, as a consequence of that, we also saw that EU accession process is suffering, that the accession process was stagnating in some cases, and in others not as fast or as we would love to. So our goal was actually to promote citizens' participation, to enhance how they work together, and to prove that citizens should be involved, and that they are actually able to be legitimate co-creators with the national and local governments. Next slide, please. So the most important thing was the methodology, because Corina, as I mentioned, and Corina already mentioned, we implemented this project in 7 different countries in the Western Balkans and the European Union. So the countries that we covered are Croatia, Bulgaria, Bosnia and Herzegovina, Serbia, Kosovo, France, and Greece. As you can see, some are established democracies for a long period of time, full-fledged members of the EU. Some of them recently joined the European Union, and some of them are candidates and aspirants for the membership in the European Union. So what we wanted was actually to create a standardized and comparative methodology, which would be followed by all the project partners, in order to have comparative results. So that's why we created a structured events, local, national, and transnational consultations, where citizens gathered to discuss 3 key thematic areas that we wanted to cover. This would be rule of law, EU integration or enlargement, and the environment. And we all have common deliberative protocol. We had the same, let's say, the same composition of the local, national, and transnational consultations, meaning that we had at least 25 citizens who represent different socio-demographic groups. So we strived to the representative sample, in a way, of citizens, including youth, older people, male, female, minorities, etc. And we had facilitators and experts who were trained before the events by Corina here. Trained by Corina in order to have the same output, to have the same methodology during the all deliberative events. Next slide, please. And here you can see a breakdown of our methodology. In total, we had more than 400 citizens in local consultations. We had 16 local consultations in 16 cities across 7 countries. During the local consultations, citizens actually mapped key problems, key challenges in the 3 aforementioned areas, and also already at that stage, some of them proposed some of the solutions how to address these issues. Then at the national level, we had actually citizens delegates, chosen citizens from local consultations who were the most active, let's say the most active during the local events. And they were joined with different stakeholders, so representatives of different institutions, civil society, experts, academia, who actually then jointly with citizens discussed the already made list of key problems and issues from local consultations, and then together jointly co-created potential solutions or recommendations for the government, local government units, and for the European Union. And then in transnational consultations held in Belgrade in September, we gathered citizens from all 7 countries in another deliberative round of deliberation, where then citizens provided, and experts also, and different stakeholders provided insights and inputs and comments to each other, so to their lists of recommendations, where they had another chance to rethink, revise their final list of policy recommendations. And final conference, today we are sitting here in Brussels and presenting the final results of this 18 months long project. The next slide, please. So some of the key findings, I cannot cover, of course, everything. I have a very limited amount of time at disposal today. But we ended up at 71 very concrete policy proposals aimed at different bodies, different levels of governance, from local level to national level to the European Union. And the most important finding for me here was that citizens are not passive observers of the policy making. They can actually be very informed and very concrete in mapping problems and proposing solutions. That's what we found out during this series of events. They could articulate very concrete policy proposals, which with the support of experts and other stakeholders were then developed to this level. And another important thing to note here is that we were able to see an important interdependence between three areas that we observed, which would be rule of law, integration, and the environment. And we confirmed it in every single country. So in every country, in every consultative event, citizens saw the strong connection between these 3 areas. Next slide, please. And here you can see some of chosen selected policy proposals out of these 71. I will not go through all of them. This is just for you to have an insight how they look like. So, for instance, what was interesting for me is that democracy was seen as a strong part and strongly connected with the rule of law. And we had an interesting policy proposal from Croatia advocating for having mandatory 2-day voting. This is very interesting. Also, when it comes to citizen consultations, what is most interesting for me is that in multiple countries, actually citizens saw the value of consultations themselves and proposed to have some kind of institutionalized mandatory consultations in their own countries. This was the case with Greece, but also in France we had an interesting proposal to institutionalize European Citizens Conventions as a permanent deliberative democratic dialogue. And what was also interesting for me is that proposals for EU integration were very prominent, especially in France, where citizens really focused on the integration, showcasing how important question that is in France itself. So we had a proposal in France, but also in Serbia, for calculating the budget for the incoming enlargement and for new member states. But also in Kosovo was an interesting proposal for communication strategy by the Kosovo government when it comes to the EU. Next slide, please. We also had some interesting environmental proposals. Environmental proposals actually varied from a country to country, and I will come to that in some of the next slides. These, actually, in environmental proposals, we could actually observe the biggest differences among countries because environmental policy proposals were heavily locally situated, so depending on local context. Next slide, please. When it comes to similarities and differences among countries, some common patterns that we were able to map in 7 countries is that underlying, bottom line is that citizens call for more transparent institutions, for depoliticizing public administration, for protecting media freedoms, and a very important component is civic education. This is something that came up in multiple countries. Civic education in different areas, in environment, in rule of law, in democracy and democratic functioning. Citizens, as I already mentioned, demanded to be recognized as relevant partners in decision making, in policy making, and this is very important finding for us. But this is also something that was common in basically all the countries where we implemented this project. Rule of law was seen as a cornerstone for basically everything, but especially in regards to other thematic areas that we covered in this project. And what is very important for us also, that there is an expectation from citizens that the government needs to more openly communicate with them, to have more direct communication. This is aimed both at national governments but also to the European Union. This is very important to keep in mind, because the EU's communication in member states but also in candidates was heavily criticized by the citizens, and they didn't actually see a clear communication plan and clear direct communication between the EU and citizens, and themselves as citizens. Environmental awareness is a cross-cutting concern, but as I mentioned, in some countries it's more about polluted water or lack of waste management infrastructure, and in other countries more developed, it's more about enforcing green standards and decarbonization. And that's an important pattern to note, is that in the Western Balkans there are more shared environmental concerns than between, and when I say Western Balkans, I mean Balkans. So for instance, there are more similar concerns between Bulgaria and Serbia and Kosovo than it is between Bulgaria and France, which speaks about general environmental standards and practices in new member states. What I wanted to point out is that my impression is that for the citizens, democracy is not only is seen through the ballot boxes, but it means actually engaging with citizens. Next slide, please. Here we are coming to the key differences. I already mentioned some of them during previous slide, but no worries. When it comes to EU integration, it's perceived completely different in the Western Balkans and in the EU member states. In the Western Balkans, European integration is perceived as a promise of transformation, as promise of reaching high standards, having strong independent institutions, functioning rule of law, functioning judiciary and other institutions. But for the EU member states, EU integration is about internal reforms, internal decision-making processes. When citizens in the EU talk about enlargement, they talk about how they will accommodate new member states, how the European Union would function. So we here could see actually two different perspectives when it comes to the EU integration. And also in the EU member states, there were open debates on deepening the European Union. So we could see clear divide here in EU member states among citizens. Some of them are open for deepening the European Union, some of them not. But this is in the focus of EU citizens compared to the Western Balkans. When it comes to the rule of law, I already mentioned, for the Western Balkans, it's all about functioning institutions, functioning rule of law, having laws that are respected, that are equal for everyone. But in the European Union, in EU member states, at least in those that we analyze here, rule of law touches more upon media literacy, fighting corruption, disinformation, education, general civic participation and education. These are the topics that that were prominent in the EU member states. Democratic maturity is a category that I wanted to point out here also as well. For the new democracies, civic engagement should be taken into account as a corrective tool, because citizens in newer democracies see politicians as elitistic, and they do not take into account citizens' wishes and opinions. So basically, the citizens are somehow excluded from the decision-making process, while in the established democracies, citizen participation are seen as a way for democratic renewal to bring back democracy to the people. And finally, when it comes to environment, divergence is grounded in local realities. So basically, in Bosnia, for instance, heavy polluted air is key topic of discussion. In Serbia, in some cities, there is no drinking water. Waste management infrastructure is a common issue in the Western Balkans. While, for instance, in France, we had proposal for having better railway system in order to decrease carbon footprint. So this is the difference we are talking about when we talk between Western Balkans and other EU member states. So this would be in a nutshell. I hope that I didn't take too much of your time. I have just one slide in the end, and this is just an excerpt from the foreword that was written kindly by Corina in the transnational volume. I really like this sentence, and she already criticized me as that it is too long. I don't want to read it. This is just for you to have it in front of you. And of course, you can read the full publication. It will be published, I think, very soon in the coming days. So thank you very much for your attention. And now I'm open for questions first from Corina and from audience as well.
Thank you. Can you hear me now? Yeah, we have to speak in the microphone because of our online participants. Thank you for this presentation and for managing to summarize the wealth of information that is in the report in 10 minutes. This report will be online shortly, and people will be able to find it where? On the CEP website, or?
It will be published on the CEP website, yes.
Okay, all right, good. So stay tuned for that. Now, if I have to follow up with a few questions for you, and maybe we'll come back to you also in the Q&A, so that we don't take too much time from the discussion. One thing that I'm curious about is, from a practical point of view, did you encounter any challenges in running this project? Because of course, there is a deliberative wave underway. We speak about the deliberative wave in Europe. We know that especially in some of the member states, such practices are well entrenched, and there's a lot of experience and a lot of such events taking place, whereas in other places less so. But still, we're not yet there in terms of a culture of citizen participation. We also see that at the European Union level, more recently, we've had more and more such consultations and assemblies and citizens events. But in general, we're far from witnessing a cultural shift in terms of embracing participation as an integral part of policymaking. So, and I would dare to say that probably this is even more so in the region, in the Balkan region, right? So this project then, it's somewhat of an innovation alongside probably other projects of a similar nature. What is your experience with it? Have you encountered any sort of challenges, anything that you want to mention and bring out, and how did you overcome them, if you did?
Thank you for that question. There are multiple challenges during this project, and I will mention like maybe two or three of them. First, the first challenge was that we were really afraid and we were being concerned about how to make sure that every single local consultation in all the countries and then national and other deliberative deliberative events follows the same common deliberative protocol that we established. We were afraid that did everyone understand what's their task? Did all facilitators knew how they need to facilitate? And to overcome this issue, the methodology that was provided kindly by Corina and EPC was really the integral part of it, because we had, for instance, different group dynamics, different people. Some of them have high democratic culture, some of them not. Sometimes we had heated debates that we needed to somehow reconcile. This was the case in Greece between young and old people when it comes to some highly debated topics like LGBTQ rights. This was the example of Greece. In Serbia, we had really heated debates when it comes to EU enlargement and issue of the, for instance, status of Kosovo. This is something that threatened to turn the debate to the wrong direction. So in that sense, the role of facilitators was instrumental, and the good preparation of facilitators really enabled us, to predict and expect this kind of challenges and to successfully overcome them. So this would be some of the example. Also, another, I would say, really big challenge for us is that in the beginning, citizens mapped thousands of problems that they want to solve, and then they propose thousands of solutions. So then we need to reconcile them to short the list in the first place, because methodology was conceived in a way that we have 10 policy proposals per country. So you can imagine if you have 3 local consultations in Serbia, and after that 3 local consultations you have proposed, for instance, more than 100 policy proposals. And then you need to organize citizens first to narrow it down, maybe to merge some of them, and finally to vote of them. Because sometimes it came down to voting because they couldn't adopt all the recommendations by consensus. So these were the challenges, but in the end of the day, I'm really happy and proud for all the project partners that we managed to deliver this to the end, because we really came down to the very concrete and very high quality proposals that I'm sure will reach the targets. At this, when I say this, I mean institutions, both here Brussels and the capitals of countries that we implemented the project.
Right. And so it's interesting that you mentioned these challenges. Were you concerned at all that citizens would not want to participate, would not want to engage, would not show up? That's just an add-on to the first question. But then, is there anything that surprised you at the end? You know, when you draw the line and now you're at the finish line, looking back, is there anything that stood out to you and left an impression?
Yeah, well, when it comes to participation, I think when it comes to Serbia, we weren't afraid that citizens won't come. We had previous experience in citizen consultation, so we knew that citizens would love to come to these events, because they are not heard by the authorities, and they really are looking for the opportunity to say what they have to say. Be it a citizen consultation that is organized by civil society and doesn't secure real policy change, but they want they want their voices to be heard, and that's why we weren't afraid. And it turned out that it wasn't a problem in any of the countries. So we easily recruited citizens for this endeavor, and yeah, it turned out very successful. When it comes to surprises, there are several of them. For me, one of the surprises was the education. Citizens are striving for education. In Serbia, they propose education in basically every area. So then we needed to somehow narrow it down. And then when I was reading...
When you say education, it's education in...
citizen education.
Citizen education.
Citizen education. So basically they're proposing education from early age. Basically from the kindergarten, about environment, about citizens' rights, about the rule of law, about institutions, for instance, in Bulgaria was the example that citizens are not informed about, basic legal rights in the legal processes. This is something that was raised by citizens there. In Serbia, it was about environment, but it was also about democracy and how the democratic institutions should function. In Croatia, we had in France we had the proposals of wider European level citizen consultation. So this is something that surprised me, because I didn't expect this to come up as so important issue, but this tells me that citizens are well informed, but they also know
what they don't know.
What they don't know, and this is very important finding from this project.
Which is also interesting in the age of information, and when there's so many sources available, we still feel like we don't know enough. Maybe that's why. Huh? All right, Milos, I will stop here because I want to come to the panel, and we want to have a discussion about all this issues. Thank you very much, and maybe in the Q&A part we'll bring you back in.
If there are any questions for me, write them down, and after we finish the panel discussion,
exactly.
I will be happy to answer them. Thank you, Corina.
But now let's. Since we talked about impressions, maybe before I come to the panel, I know you came with a delegation that includes also citizens, the citizens who participated in these consultations, right? And I wonder if there are any citizens in the room, and maybe we can have one or two testimonials very, very briefly to say, to tell us something about how they felt about this experience. Is there anybody who would? Yeah? Okay. But shortly.
Good morning. I am Marc Blanchot. I am a French citizen, donc I am not an expert. And I will tell you a few words about my experience. And at first, I would like to greet everyone and to thank our host, the European Policy Center, and all the organizers of the REACH project. This project was for me such a great experience. Indeed, I was very lucky to participate to the 3 events. The first event, it was in my local town of Dijon in Burgundy. It was a local consultation, and it was very interesting to exchange with the citizens of different ages and social conditions, ages from 18 to 93, for example. In a special context, because the French context, we have many Eurosceptics. In Dijon, we spoke a lot about the need for a narrative for Europe. The next step, we had the national consultation in Paris in May with citizen delegates and stakeholders. We refined and finalized the recommendation developed by citizens, and the help and the exchanges with the stakeholders were very precious. Finally, we presented in the nice city of Belgrade in September our 10 proposals to the other countries, members or not members of the EU, and that was a very important and instructive point. It was very nice idea. We listened to the comments from the other countries and we refined our proposals. After the 3 events, I can say that discussion revealed common points as direct and participatory democracy, transparency and communication, civic education, environment, enlargement in the respect of the rule of law and green transition. As a conclusion, I would like to say that I felt a lot of energy, trust, optimism, and a strong will to build together a stronger, fairer, and more democratic EU. After this experience, I feel more European than ever. Thank you for your attention.
Thank you so much. Was this the first time that you participated in such an event? It's for you. It was the first time you participated? Yes, first time. Okay, thank you. Is there a lady as well for gender balance to? Yeah. Okay.
Hi everyone. I don't have anything prepared. but I'm able to share my experience from the event. So first I want to thank the organizers for sharing the findings of this project with us. I think they're very interesting. And what I'd like to say is that I've been mostly involved in events that focus on youth involvement and engagement. And this was the first time that I encountered discussions with people from different age groups. And it was really interesting to see the interaction between young people, I mean, with an actress in her early 20s and a doctor in his late 70s, to see about their strong opinions on how environment and climate crisis impacts on human health. And I also found very interesting that education was also mentioned in all of the events cross-border, and there's a lack of education, significant lack of education. And I think the issue with that is that people are well informed, but they don't actually know where to find information on topics that they're interested about. I mean, there's an abundance of information, disinformation, disillusionment, and it's very important, I think, to extract these findings from your report and send them to ministries and make some policy proposals about sources where people can be informed and well informed. This is how I experienced the project, and I'm very happy to be part of it. Thank you.
What? Greece. Okay. Well, I think there are other citizens present, so maybe after the event you can talk to them if there's interest to learn more about their sentiment. I don't think this is a surprise. I think, Camille, you have a lot of experience. Maybe later on you'll share from that. It's generally the case that citizens are left feeling changed about such processes. But let's come to our panel now, and maybe Igor, I come to you because we heard at the end now in this final testimony that there is a certain degree of expectation about this kind of input and this kind of participation then being reflected or influencing politics and policy making. What makes such processes, based on your experience, you actually work on citizen participation, and now you've been responsible for the Croatian chapter in this project. What makes such processes meaningful in your opinion?
Thank you. Hi to all, and thank you for inviting me to participate on this panel. So my name is Igor Bajok. I'm coming from the association Smart Rijeka and Croatia. Just a little bit about the context about Smart and Croatia. So the invitation to join the Project REACH came just around when we were closing the first citizens assembly in Croatia ever organized in the city of Rijeka. So we had a meeting with the mayor and the members of the citizens assembly where he declared that he accepts 48 out of 90 proposals and recommendations delivered and drafted by the members of the CA. Regarding the strengthening of sub-municipal framework, the neighborhoods, and the participation of citizens. At the same time, we started organizing and supporting the organization of the second Citizens Assembly in Croatia in Varaždin, in the city of Varaždin, on sustainable tourism. There, the citizens delivered 50 recommendations on sustainable tourism. At the same time, we entered the EU SORT network led by Sortition Foundation. I suppose you know about them, and maybe other participants as well, starting recruiting Croatian citizens to participate in European citizens panels, right? That were held in the last year and a half. I think there were 5 European citizens panels, as well as the first Young Citizens Assembly on pollinators and biodiversity, right? So you were speaking about a deliberative wave in European Union. I think it's happening also in Croatia, but also in other countries in the region, in the Western Balkans. And now, as also I think you mentioned, but also Milos, we have to see, so we are experimenting, learning fast, piloting, and the question is, do we have a plane? We have pilots, but we have to see how we can standardize, institutionalize if necessary, spread the idea of democratic innovations and deliberative methods and approaches for citizens to participate. One important lesson that we learned from all of the events that we organized or supported is that citizens are willing to participate. Not all, but if you organize deliberative events in a meaningful way, doing all the necessary steps, following the standards and the principles of organizing such events, it's transformative for everybody involved. Not just the citizens, but the name. So after the evaluation of our first citizens assembly in Rijeka, most of the participants said it was transformative, and now they are key advocates and promoters of the methodology per se, towards their families, towards their neighbors, colleagues in work, etc. But it is also transformative for the civil servants involved, for the experts as well, for different stakeholders. So I think that we should move on with piloting, learning, experimenting, but also trying to make it not innovation, not something that happens once every few years, but to move on to lean into the deliberative way that obviously is happening. So citizens are willing to participate. They can do it in a very meaningful, very efficient way. Their recommendations are highly relevant. There will always be people who will smirk, and laugh to efforts like this and citizens' recommendations. There are several different reasons, but I think if we organize it properly, then it can really change lives of those involved and also the local communities they belong to. And finally, I'm extremely proud to announce that in 10 days we are going to have the first Young Citizens Assembly in Pula on the recently established youth center. What about the programs and the governing of the whole thing? So we are trying to use different participatory and deliberative approaches and making that small deliberative wave stronger. And I think that one thing that is quite important is one of the questions was also for Milos, whether he was concerned about the project, the methodology. We had, for all of you that are working in fundraising for your organization, the invitation for SMART to join Project REACH came just a few weeks before signing the contract. So it's a dream come true for most NGOs, But on the other side, we didn't have the opportunity to participate in designing the project and the methodology. So we were extremely worried, actually, whether we are going to pull it off, because dealing with 30 people, dealing with, as we call them, 3 small topics or issues, like EU integration, environment, and the rule of law and democracy, as we added, it was quite a challenge. But obviously, when you organize the thing as it should be organized with a great methodology, it works, both on local levels, with local experts, and the great communication and exchange that we had with other stakeholders, including representatives of the European Parliament office and delegation of European Commission that also participated, and their perspective was also very important to bring up these 10 recommendations from Croatia. So one final thing, and then I will stop sharing my thoughts. One thing that we participated online in the transnational event in Belgrade due to some unfortunate circumstances for Croatian citizens in Serbia. Now, I think that if we have a transnational event in Zagreb or in Croatia, I think it would be quite difficult probably for our colleagues from Serbia to come in Croatia due to highly problematic social and societal situation in Western Balkans, especially in Croatia and Serbia, and that we can talk about maybe after the panel because it's not the key topic. So we managed to do it, and I think that we can all be proud of primarily the citizens involved and their role in delivering all of these recommendations. And the thought that I almost missed. So for Croatia, and that goes towards EU integration, the rule of law, democracy, etc., the period of transitioning towards EU and the accession period was the golden age of developing the Croatian civil society and democratization of the whole country. So for those countries that are in different phases or stages, yes, of entering EU, use the opportunity to make meaningful, sustainable changes, because after the accession, the big eye looking toward your accession process and successes will vanish. And then you are again on your own with our own governments and our own problems within our societies. So that's the experience from Croatia, and we are looking forward to the new European strategy on civil society, because Croatia doesn't have one for more than 10 years. So these are some of the maybe thoughts to bear in mind while proceeding forward. So thank you from me for now.
Thank you, Igor. And certainly we heard your call that such processes need to be or should be normalized. They shouldn't be the exception, but become more and more the rule. And I think it's great that your organization is playing a role towards that goal. But now coming to Ioanna. Ioanna, thank you for joining us. I have already introduced you, so I will jump in to follow up with a question for you as well directly. So we use this comparative methodology. Did it help, do you think, to sort of flesh out differences and similarities across different countries, not just different member states, but between member states and the Balkan aspirants?
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you so much for your question, and good morning, everybody. And I apologize for us being a little bit late. We weren't prepared for the traffic. But yes, I think when I think back to the transnational conference in Belgrade, one thing that really stands out to me is how key those discussions were to helping us get our ideas from sort of rough aspirations to actual very concrete policy proposals with a very measurable implementation plan. And I think that really came from the ability to talk to everybody else and to see the different perspectives, the different ideas, and really understand that. And I think the Greek delegation specifically, we left feeling very inspired by how ambitious some of the other proposals were. That was something that I think really jumped out at me, that EU aspirants specifically were looking to the EU to almost be a driver of very systemic change for them. Whereas in Greece, as a member state already, we were looking much more to civic education, enhancing sentiment of European identity, EU visibility. We spoke a lot about, I think this was echoed in some of France's proposals as well. And again, I think maybe this is interesting, what it says about hope and disillusionment in terms of where somebody is on the enlargement ladder, whether they're pre or post becoming a member. Because I think what came through was that in Greece, people were not sure what the EU can do for them. So we were looking more to see how can we show people what the EU does for you? How can we prove these concrete, benefits that exist? Whereas other countries were looking much more to the EU as a driver. And I think there was almost a running joke that we left Belgrade with in the Greek delegation that, other delegation teams were aiming to target high-profile ministers for corruption, really, really ambitious things. And we had planned to take schools on excursions to bridges built by EU funds to show them, which perhaps maybe felt a little bit silly. But I think what it really shows is the difference in attitudes towards the European Union and how each country feels and how much of a European sentiment there is. So I think that was what, for me, really stood out.
Did you have the feeling that there was also a learning curve among participants, meaning that, despite or with their different understandings and experiences and expectations, did you feel that by talking, for instance, in the transnational event, people sort of learned and became more aware by exchanging with people who have different expectations, understandings, experiences?
Yeah, absolutely. I think even maybe on a personal level, these meetings, just sitting in a round table, in Belgrade with people from so many different places and discussing, was really beneficial, and not just for the citizens, like for me as well. And the table I was facilitating at, for example, there was one person from the Greek delegation, and this trip was their first time getting on a plane and going somewhere else. So, imagine how much of a difference that opportunity makes, not only to go abroad and to speak to fellow Europeans and really get a feeling that, this is a common home, and we should all, feel like one. Yeah.
Okay, thank you, Ioanna. Let's come back to our panelists and experts who have not been directly involved in the project, but who have a wealth of experience to bring to bear. And maybe I will start from Blerta. IDEA works on globally on democracy and governance, and I'm wondering, by reading through the findings of this project, what do you think it tells us about the health of democracy, and how can international partners help with reforms proposals like the ones that have come out of this to be heard and taken up by policymakers?
Good morning. Is this on? Yeah, okay. Thank you, Corina. Thanks for having me, and congratulations for all this work, which I have to say resonates a lot with what we feel on the other side as a think and do tank at International IDEA. For those that are not familiar, we're an intergovernmental organization of 35 member states, 10 of which are EU member states, and otherwise the rest democracies from around the world. We're active in over 80 countries in the world, Stockholm-based, but I sit in our Regional Europe program, where we run a program on the Western Balkans. So I appreciate this opportunity for these insights. Now, I'm very struck by the citizens, also ability to see these interconnections between the topics, and that is where, which Milos emphasized, and that's where I want to pick it up from. Just to say that at International IDEA, we don't run citizen assemblies as such, but we run this very comprehensive global state of affairs, global state of democracy methodology and indices, where we meticulously track democracy trends, among which rule of law and participation. And so what I did before coming here was to fiddle around a bit with data, where Europe is going, where you mentioned a bit, I mean, it's not a surprise, there's a bit of stagnation in Europe overall in rule of law trends, if not decline, and democracy overall. However, one thing is clear for all of the countries you've covered, and the European trend in general, that when I look at the indices for the last 10 years, the graphs looking at rule of law and participation, for example, the two never contradict each other, follow each other. We can discuss, I mean, endlessly on the causality relationship, but it's clear that there is no rule of law without participation, and vice versa. If a country is going down, it's going down on both. If it's improving on both, and that's an important interconnection to bear in mind. And same, we also work a lot on climate change and democracy, so all of the issues of environment, where again, in our research, just to back what the citizen sentiment is that, again, when you talk environment or climate action challenges and democracy, one will save the other, or one will bring down the other. This should be there's plenty of our own evidence, but any respectable institute out there that has researched this, that democracies fare better and participation fares better in tackling climate. Maybe not enough, we can agree, we can discuss, but fare better. So all the arguments in favor of more citizen participation, and it's often the case that to make the link between rule of law and participation and environment, which that Milos also emphasized, it's often the case that even in the Balkans, for example, that an initiative that is driven by a small group of citizens ends up in a court case, and you need a functioning judiciary there, right, to deliver for, I don't know, we have several examples from the Balkans, sometimes good, sometimes less good, that have led to more societal polarization. So just to make it clear how rule of law is so, functioning of judiciary, for example, is important. Also, oftentimes, particularly on environmental issues, but on any issues that citizens want to participate on locally or centrally, it's often the citizens, the communities, versus important lobbying interests, economic interests, and there the importance, again, direct link to rule of law, regulation. Can we say in the Balkans that lobbying laws are transparent enough, developed enough, even that lobbying interests are overseen enough. So again, to make those important points, because I think they bring me to my next point, that is the importance of the impact, basically, of these citizen assemblies. I am very much in favor. I genuinely believe that citizens, they don't have a political science degree, maybe not all the language and terminology, but they have an intelligence, an intuition of things that are right or wrong for the development of their societies. So it's important that these assemblies are not one-offs, as you were saying, Igor, that they are embedded in policy making regularly. They need political support. They need the vision of politicians, because they are addressed somewhere. They are not just, they may be correct, but they need follow-up, right? They need a commitment to be followed up. So this is, and if I can end, perhaps also for the sake of time, on a note of course, what the EU, what international partners can do. The EU is a major driver of reform in the Western Balkans, in accession countries, and I think it can do two things practically. First, with its reform agenda, help these countries improve the legislative process by embedding these practices, these innovative approaches, improve. They are doing, of course, improving the judiciary efficiency, but improving lobbying laws, the parliamentary work, and all of this, where these can be channeled. But also the EU can lead by example, by embedding these practices, and hearing citizens, including enlargement, in its own programming, policy making. I'll just end with one example, that I'm informed by the European Parliament of an intention, a will to conduct a citizen assembly in Albania next year that will feed into the next European Parliament Stabilization Association Committee meeting. This is a practical example of bringing to the attention, changing, making that political, cultural shift. So there's many more, of how to embed these processes, but I'll end here, and thank you again. Congratulations. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Blerta. I come maybe to Camille next, if you're okay, because of course Mission Publique is a point of reference when it comes to designing and implementing deliberative processes, and you've had a little preview into the methodology and the findings of this project, and I wonder how does this compare to some of the work that you've done, or some of the work you're familiar with, and we've heard already several times today about the importance of making such experiences and such events not only a regular fixture of our policy making, but also making them count. And from where you stand, do you think there's hope to get there? Yeah. Comments? Okay, I'll give you mine.
Thanks, Corina. There are several questions in that question. I'll start perhaps by saying that yes, I've had the I don't know, by now it's been 7 years that I'm doing this job of organizing deliberative assemblies in France at the European level, and in the Balkans a little bit, although I haven't been there myself, so I cannot say that I've run them. And I have met hundreds and hundreds of citizens, and it's true that it struck me when I read the report that I was not surprised, but that was a surprise in itself, because actually, I think we're also reaching a stage of saturation with these methods. So what I did when I read your report is that, of course, I read the recommendation, and then I was struck by, okay, this sounds very familiar. So then I read again the report from the Conference on the Future of Europe from the citizens, not the plenary report. I read the European Citizens panels on the environment final reports from 5 years ago. I've read the one from the panel on democracy and rule of law, again from 5 years ago. And I have read the
Can you just say 2 words on the conference in case people don't know what the Conference on the Future of Europe was?
Yes, so the Conference on the Future of Europe was a joint experiment. I guess it was at least like this back then. 5 years ago already, initiated by the Commission, the Parliament and the Council, to basically take stock of where the European population stand when it comes to the future policies and future policy with the future policy even. So what is the big plan for Europe for the next 10, 20, 30 years? So basically starting from scratch, agenda setting on a lot of different topics. And since REACH is only about 3 topics, I only looked at what came out from this experiment on the environment and rule of law. And I also looked at what came out from the European Citizens Panels on budget last year, and from intergenerational fairness this very weekend, because they're kind of, again, agenda setting, and it's a bit always the same questions, honestly. And what's really, really striking, and I have asked ChatGPT for help with this, I have to admit, 80% of the results between just EU citizens' recommendation on this topic and just the Balkan candidate countries, so I excluded France and Greece for that ones, is the same. And actually, the difference is, of course, you explained it. It's also because some people look at it from the inside and some people look at it from the outside, which is normal. We are at different stage in the accession process. But I think it also speaks to your method. And I really wanted to say congrats, and I'm really impressed. As you know, at the European Citizens level, at the European Citizens Panels, we do things at the supranational level. And so you bring 150 citizens in Brussels, and it creates very strong consensus. So it's amazing, and it creates really European citizens, that's for sure. But it has a tendency to gloss over a little bit, I would say, what makes also national differences, good or bad, stand out, but also some regional also realities, because you mentioned also that there are regional realities. And that's a little bit of a pity, if you're my opinion. And now, after doing this for 6 years, I'm more and more thinking we need to think about a methodology to do this at the European level that is more translocal rather than transnational. And I find so I'm more and more going to the translocalism kind of concept rather than transnational. And I think generally it fits perhaps more what the EU is as a political entity, right? At least that's what my EU teachers were telling me back then when I was at university. So that's my first observation. It's not just because they're in and out, it's also the method itself and how you connected the local, national, and supranational. I find that extremely interesting. And that you made people travel from Dijon to Belgrade and not to Brussels is also symbolically very important, because politics is about symbol. And saying 80% of this recommendation being the same, from where I stand, I also do not really understand what are we waiting for to have candidate countries taking part in the European Citizens Panels, to be honest. Now in my field, we are talking a lot about including future generations of European in the deliberation, even non-humans, but we are not talking about the people who will be actually living European citizens in 10 years. It feels normatively a bit wrong, if you want my personal opinion. And it wouldn't be so hard to do, to be honest. So that's the first observation. And then another thing that I did is that I look at the report from France, because I'm French and well, I have my bias, but also because I had a point of comparison with the French national consultation from the Conference on the Future of Europe, which I didn't have for Greece, because Greece didn't do a proper student assembly back then. And what struck me is that over 5 years, it has almost not changed. So it's extremely consistent with what the French citizens said 5 years ago, despite AI, despite the war in Ukraine, despite the genocide in Gaza, despite everything that has happened in 5 years, and God knows that a lot of things happened. And so it goes back to my first point, have we reached a little bit of saturation? You know, when you do research and when you do focus group, for example, usually you don't do more than 12 or 15, because at some point it's the same things that keep coming up. I'm not saying that student assemblies are focus group, they are not. But if they are done properly at some point, yes, it's saying something that we always have the same results coming up. And we have always the same things when it comes to Europe and the future direction that the EU should take. So perhaps we should indeed listen and now follow up. And it goes back to the point you were saying about the impact. And I think there is a trap in talking about experimentation, actually. Often we talk about experimentation, and I let it pass for Croatia because perhaps there you still are experimenting. But when it comes to the EU, For example, the EU is not experimenting anymore. The EU has been since Plan D and the referendum of 2025. There have been already an ancestor to the Conference on the Future of Europe. There have been even deliberative polls in 2007 by Fishking. I discovered that recently. Nobody knows. There have been hundreds of projects funded doing deliberative assemblies. There have been national consultation. EPC was involved in 2017. 11 European citizens panels. 11. So we are not experimenting. And I think there is a rhetoric trap in using also the word of experimentation, because it kind of, give you kind of a pass not to actually do the policy follow-up work. So.
Thank you so much, Camille. I mean, this is really it's very eye-opener that you're looking at the bigger picture and at the trends. And it's very interesting what you say. Though I have to wonder whether it's a question of saturation, that we keep seeing the same results and the same message, or whether we have to look at it that my repetition is the mother of learning, let's call it. That it hasn't been heard, and in a sense it's worrisome that we have to find over and over again the same concerns, the same issues, the same requests, because that means that they haven't been dealt with, right? So maybe we need to continue to do it, and we need to continue to hear the same thing until somebody pays attention to them and does something about it. Well, let's continue during the Q&A. I come to Mr. Quinn. Thank you for your patience. I did it on purpose to leave you last, to give you an opportunity to listen to all of the input. But from my side, maybe what I would like to ask you is, we talked a lot about the intersection. Or the intersection between these three issues has been mentioned, and I'm wondering, when it comes to the link, for instance, between the environment protection and fairness and trust, to what extent the Commission is integrating social and rule of law dimensions into its environmental policy and cooperation? So how is this intersectionality between issues reflected in the kind of work that you're doing? About the microphone. Maybe you take mine, because
Is that better? Better, yeah, I can hear that, yeah. Okay, good. So I was just saying thank you very much for the initiative, because the link between rule of law and environment, if you think about it for a bit, is absolutely fundamental, but people don't think about it for that bit very often. So the short answer to your question is not as much as we should. The interlinkages are not as much as we should. We kind of hope they happen organically. But maybe I'll begin by a couple of thoughts, and then also, but my first reaction is, if everybody knows that this is an important issue, we've been doing the assemblies 150 times over how many decades? I mean, why doesn't it translate into policy? I mean, that is really the next step, to also invigorate these assemblies, because if people think their voice and this process is making a difference, then surely that's the biggest way to kind of build a snowball effect. And if they feel it's just words that are lost in the snow, which is a good metaphor for today, then I think people lose energy. And yet there is a clear link. The two examples I'll give is, I had a quick look at Eurobarometer. We've all been checking our sources. It's still the environment is still one of the top issues that citizens care about. I mean, cost of living, number one, of course. But environment, of the top two issues, 10% of people say it's one of their top two issues. And yet migration, immigration, which we hear about all the time, you think, is it 50%? Is it 25%? It's 5%. But why do we talk all about immigration and why not about environment, which is apparently what people want to care about? So that's a question. There's a disconnect between what people are saying, what your panels are saying, and what the political discussion is. And I don't have a solution. That's an observation. Another observation, I have some Danish connections. But if I look at the local elections, which were yesterday in Denmark, any Danes here? No. Maybe local elections in Denmark, the turnout for the local election, 70%. 70% for a local election. And that is as high participation as you could really dream about in many countries. But it's also Denmark, which tops all the rankings, or together with the Nordic countries, on rule of law and on environmental protection. So again, there's another research project to be done here. I'll give ideas to our people here, but the link between actual rule of law, environmental protection, and actual local participation, there seems to me to be a link there. So that's my observations. To answer your questions, well, the link is very obvious, I think, when you think about it. Because if you don't have rule of law, you can have the best legislation in the world, it just will not be implemented. And that's a risk we have in the enlargement context. Several countries, Albania I know, but are actively saying, well, we will use AI to transpose the EU legislation. Well, that's fantastic. You have some great laws. They're not going to be implemented. And that's a real concern, because also our enlargement colleagues tend to say, oh, well, this has been transposed, that's been transposed, tick, you've done well. It doesn't mean anything if the law is on the statute book. So that's one concern, and so enforceability is very important. But also, if you don't have a functioning rule of law system, if the inspectors can be bribed, if the judges are corrupt, and let's be fair, that does happen, then the whole thing doesn't work. I mean, your plant is polluting, well, here's $1,000, turn your eye. If it gets to court, well, we can find a good judge, turn your eye. So the whole thing, it underpins, rule of law underpins every policy area, but in particular, I would say environment, or areas like environment, where you have strong economic and politically vested interests, which may be challenged. And you need rule of law to be able to challenge those interests. If not, dams get built and airports built, where they perhaps shouldn't. So I think that's very important. And it's also just to make the link that bad environmental governance can actually lead to bad governance and rule of law problems. Because where you have a law on the statute book which cannot be implemented, you have an absolutely perfect tool for corruption. You can go to the business saying, you're not implementing this law. Well, it's not there, but that's really a very useful way to basically extort money. I'll just finish by illustrating that with a little story. Many years ago, I was in Ukraine, many years before the fighting. And it was an environmental conference I was helping organize. And one of the people arriving there had said, well, I'm quite impressed. We got stopped by the police in the taxi, and the police were actually carrying out an inspection of the emissions from the taxi. And this was a British delegate. I said, so I didn't realize they were so environmentally conscious in Ukraine. And the Ukrainians had to explain to him very politely that this had absolutely nothing to do with the emissions. It was to do with supplementing the police income. But there is a close link in both ways. So that's what I would say. I mean, some food for thought, but just to again conclude by making the link between participation, environment, and rule of law. I think this is a fantastic project. So congratulations to all involved.
Thank you so much. Maybe a quick follow-up question, because I think you, I hope you had the chance to screen over the findings when it comes to the environment, and I wonder to what extent the proposals that have come out, have transpired in this project, are reflected also in the work that the EU and the Commission is doing when it comes to environmental policy. Do they resonate?
To be honest, not directly, because most of the proposals were local issues, which understandably people care about the river next to them, the air pollution around them, whereas at the European level we deal with European frameworks. So there's not that direct link there. I think it's more the principle there. And looking at the overall recommendations, I think about 2/3 were to do with rule of law, and only a few specific ones on environment. But as I said, getting the overall rule of law, the courts and the inspection systems, is essential before you have the environment. So yeah.
Okay, about half an hour left. So yeah, hands going up.
Thank you. Good morning. Does it work? Yes. Excellent. My name is Burçak İnel. I have a background in financing sustainability. And I have one comment and two questions. Thank you very much. My comment is, first of all, about what Blerta said. I very much agree with what you said about lobbying. I recently taught a course on lobbying, ethical lobbying. And in the context of preparing for that, I also thought a lot about, especially in terms of environmental policies, how the wrong kind of lobbying erodes both the perception and the reality of fair policies, because they lead to policies that are not fair, and they also give the impression of unfairness. I think that's very, very important. My question is, first of all, in terms of this project and maybe other projects that you're aware of, first of all, to what extent was there knowledge among citizens, knowledge about existing governmental policies? And did you test that? Because obviously there's a lot of misinformation also about existing policies. And secondly, to what extent were these people, these citizens, also involved in maybe their own political parties' participatory processes to the extent that they exist? Thank you.
Thank you. My name is Milena Mihajlović-Denić. I'm Program Director of CEP Belgrade, the coordinator of the project. And I have to say that from the very beginning of this event, my eyes have been tearing up. I think that this is one of the most wonderful projects that we have done together with the EPC. And I'm really now, after this discussion, thinking about the policy implications and follow-up that Camille spoke about. I actually agree with Corina that the fact that we are becoming repetitive can actually be the power. And the more we repeat it, the louder we will be, because then, it's not the same citizens repeating, it's different citizens from different countries repeating. And I think that those voices, as they accumulate, they should become louder and louder. But I'm thinking about the policy follow-up, and I would be curious to hear from anyone on the panel who is willing to comment on that, how we can do the most effective follow-up. How can different initiatives, projects, that have conducted these citizen consultations and have come up with quite overlapping and similar follow-up, how can they maybe join forces to amplify those voices of the citizens and to ensure more bottom-up pressure for actual policy follow-up? Thank you.
That was actually one of my questions as well. So I'm a founding member of the Youth Climate Diplomacy Forum for Southeast Europe. And basically our aim is to amplify the voices of young people in climate diplomacy in the region. But one of the main barriers that we face in our mission, and through the podcast that I'm doing with Ioanna, Young, Loud and Green, for anyone who wants to hear it, is the fact that young people in the region face high rates of unemployment, social injustices, and economic inequalities, and face civic engagement as a luxury. Is that something that you also face during this project? Maybe, citizens and young people thinking of civic engagement as a luxury? That's one of my questions. Thank you.
Can you hear it now? Yeah, it works. Yeah. Okay. So your question was about the general knowledge of citizens on government policies. We also, when we started the local consultations, we also were taking it about it, that probably citizens don't know too much, that we need somehow to support them. That's why the methodology actually envisaged that we have facilitators who facilitate the discussions, and experts who are there, sitting there to provide citizens with answers to guide them when it comes to policy. So experts were not involved in, directly creating policies or proposals. They just were there to answer citizens' questions. So about when a citizen doesn't know and some law or some policy, there is an expert that can explain to them directly at the spot, so that then citizens can get an informed decision. So that's how we wanted to bridge this gap. But here comes the surprise: the citizens actually knew more than we expected. They were very, very well informed. Sometimes they knew less. Something they knew more. Sometimes they were disinformed. This is another issue. That's why we had experts. But in general, I was surprised how well prepared they were for the discussions. This is the case with Serbia, but I think I'm not very much wrong with other countries, but maybe Ioanna and others can also jump in here with their experience. When it comes to the second question, just about party...
On this point, because part of the this was also an issue that we tried to address through the methodology, also by engaging at the transnational level at least, but also at the national level, if I remember correctly, engagement between citizens and other stakeholders, including politicians or experts who have knowledge, expert knowledge in policy making on those topics, with the intention not of having citizens being influenced or but rather facilitating a better understanding and raising awareness about the extent to which the proposals made are already on the table or are already part of the legislative framework, and to what extent what they were asking for made any sense in policy terms. So this was at least in the methodological design foreseen, but I don't know, Milos and the partners, if you thought that this actually paid off in the end to have it as an element, as a methodological element.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, for instance, in the case of Serbia, sometimes terminological issues really make a difference. So when you have an expert, a stakeholder who is in the topic, who knows what he's talking about, citizens, have some basic idea what they want to achieve, but they don't know terminology, they don't know the language, they don't know how policy making is done. Then you have stakeholders and experts who guide them, who I called it in the report are served as a corrective factor, just to support citizens, but not to influence the process of creating recommendations. And just one sentence about the second question is about party affiliation. This is a very interesting question. We didn't actually, we didn't ask citizens if they are members of any political party, maybe because if we did it, they may be too shy or they wouldn't, act naturally. This is one thing. And second thing, I'm not sure that, especially in the Balkans, but probably in other countries, that their membership in the parties actually can influence decision making. So the parties are highly elitistic. They don't have democratic potential within themselves. So I don't, my understanding is that citizens, even if they are affiliated with some political party, they don't really see the party as a means for influencing policy making, which is another problem for itself. But that's why we came up with citizens consultation in the first place.
Yeah. I was maybe thinking a little bit
more about France when you ask that question. Do you mean to say that this reflects a concern that the composition of the deliberative group should include also views that are of a more radical?
No, sorry, I interrupted you. But I think I was especially prompted when I was listening to Martijn. I think there's something that you said that made me think of that. But essentially, well, in an ideal scenario, the political parties should also be democratic. And I'm originally from Turkey, so I'm also thinking of the Turkish example. So basically, I think when you said the political agenda, migration, I think that was the comment that you made. And that's absolutely true, both in terms of which issues to focus on, and also in an issue, what to focus on. what proposal to make. And when in a situation where the political parties are doing n'importe quoi, obviously then these kinds of citizens' assemblies have even more limited role. So it's not a criticism of your design at all. I was just curious, especially about those countries where perhaps there's a bit more political party democracy. Thank you.
I mean, I echo what Milos said about the first two questions. Can I jump in on the third question, Natalia's question? Yeah, I mean, I absolutely agree. And I think that's something that we always have to think about. I mean, who at the end of their 8, 9, 10-hour workdays coming home and thinking, oh, how can I, get more involved in the European Union? Okay, it's probably not that many people. But I think that what was so great about this project is that it tried not to create another echo chamber. Of course, there's a lot of events like this, and usually in Athens especially, I can say it's the same bubble of young people that attend all the events, that are very involved, that are studying political science. But in this project, we were specifically looking, for citizens from all different kind of backgrounds, no academic backgrounds. And I think that's what made it so strong, is that we tried to get everybody's opinion, everybody's perspective, and not the people that are, already thinking about this and already wanting to work, in this sphere. Yeah.
The unusual suspect. Igor, do you want to chip in on this? And also maybe touching...
You wanted to take more, but...
Okay. Yeah? Okay.
Sorry. Maybe not the direct answer or my opinion towards the questions that we received, but maybe it will feed into your question or comment. So, since you mentioned, Camille, the saturation, maybe with the methodology in some parts of Europe, some countries, I'm not sure if I understood it correctly. I think it's clearly it can be a risk. But on one conference on mini Publiques, a mayor, former 20 years long advocate from civil society sector, who became mayor of a city in Istria, and now she has the second term. I was perplexed when she said, okay, maybe we should think about, is there too much participation on some occasions, etc., etc. But she was also the leader of the organization that brought into that same city the first participatory budgeting project. And everybody were hating the project. Nobody understood why would citizens have to have a say in designing how a small part of the city municipal budget should be distributed, right? But it was a huge success. It goes on after 12 years, improves every year based on the evaluation of the previous process, and it became a routine, but not in a negative sense, but that all participants from all the sides of the board clearly understand how the process works, and it's actually quite efficient. And it was, again, transformative for all of those involved. And I don't know if you have the experience. I don't know how it's on the EU level. I know on local level in Croatia. I suppose it's similar in many other Balkan countries. When you, as a citizen, a group of citizens, propose something, what is the most common answer from the civil servants and the government? Thank you. Thank you, no. We can't, we won't, we never did it that way. So there is a plethora of reasons why not to move forward the agenda, the suggestion, the proposal. But while organizing the opportunity for all those involved, you can, and I was really lucky. I was the lead facilitator for 10 years. I facilitated more than 100 participatory budgeting in Pazin. When you see the change from I hate citizens, I hate civil servants, we don't have any mutual trust, no empathy at all, from no, that cannot be done, towards, okay, cool, that's a problem, let's think together how we can solve the problem. And then everybody knows, and then occasionally every few years come a new citizen that never participated. He is or she is highly emotional, frustrated because there is a big major problem and these are small communal initiatives. And what happens? The group says, okay, dear neighbor, it's not the time, it's not the topic, let's do it in a proper way, following the agenda, etc. So I think that repetition, continuation, sustainability is highly relevant. Saturation is obvious risk, but there is also another thing. When we started the Citizens Assembly of Rijeka, we explained it publicly about the sortition process, you know, and then nobody understood or was willing to accept that some randomly selected citizens who actually registered would be put into power to deliver some recommendations on an issue. So there is quite a lot of things that you have to put on the agenda to explain and then to follow up and have actual and meaningful influence and impact. And we are currently still struggling with that, you know. So there is a lot of PR. We did it. It was great. And now it's in ladica, kako se kaže, Milos? In a drawer. The policy recommendations are in the drawer. But, you know, again, on the other day, you naively and highly optimistically go to another town, you check another methodology, try another topic, and move on with it. So I think it can be done. It can be overly saturated. And the question of is there too many participation bothers me a lot, because I know that the expert might say, okay, that's too much, the process, the procedures, the bylaws, the everything. So it's not easy and can be a problem as well. So that's on my behalf.
Okay. Well, though I have to ask myself, is this the right question? Is it, do we have too much participation, or do we have too little openness to embrace the results of participation? And it's good that you say that in a sense the appetite comes with eating. So we need to keep doing these things. And if I understand you correctly, one other thing that is important to note is that when we talk about a culture of openness towards creating a culture of openness towards such participatory initiatives, is that it doesn't only concern political elites, it also concerns citizens, that everybody, it's a societal change and shift that has to happen. So we also have to warm up citizens to the idea of participating and engaging and accepting to be active.
And
but
just one more thing, and I will not take the mic if possible. One of the key problems I saw during the last decades of dealing in citizens' participation is the disappointed citizens who participated in a participatory process. It's going to be highly difficult to get them back, you know, to participate again.
Sure.
There is no follow-up. It's just PR. It's just ventilation. So we have a huge debate over the waste management, again in Pazin. But it was a PR stunt by the former mayor. He exposed the director of the communal service. He got all the heat. People were talking, discussing. We were first frustrated. When Ho felt a little better, nothing changed, you know. So there are a lot of pitfalls that we can get in, and one of the worst, I think, is to lose willing citizens to participate after a fake or unsuccessful or unimpactful participatory or deliberative event.
Yes, though I wonder to what extent being transparent about the intentions of the exercise can help with that, or whether people will anyway get disappointed just by force of, getting carried away with their participation. But this is a question maybe for Camille also. What's her impression on that? But I first come to Blerta because you've been itching to take the mic, and I'm sorry I had to make you wait.
Is this on? Yeah, okay, thank you. Now, actually very much on the lines of, I was more approving than itching on the lines of what you started in response to the colleague from Belgrade. I mean, of course, in terms of impact, ideally, we need to think of assemblies as a tiny element, one component of a chain in a broader cycle, right? Where you have that political initiative or commitment, that I mentioned, and then the exercise, and then of course the follow-up. And this is often the case in Western Europe, most of, in Brussels, in Milan, and oftentimes it's a minister that will, or a local government that will initiate, and so often these are embedded in a process already, as it should be, let's say, in an ideal case. And actually also on this note, at IDEA we have looked at climate assemblies globally, northern part of the world, southern part of the world, so there's a lot of lessons of what has worked or not, and I would invite you to take a look maybe. However, your remark and your desire for impact also made me think of another part of the literature which compares what happens in these processes in the West and what happens in the former communist bloc, where also our countries belong, in the Balkans, and so typically in the West, it's what I said, right? There's often an initiative from a political leader or someone empowering government in an office, right? While in Eastern Europe, I'll call it Eastern, the East part for ease of of terminology, it's often actually that these initiatives are piloted by an NGO, civil society, because there is a historic context of distrust, of low trust in the intentions of, the context. Probably many of us are from that area. So this is not, in my view, to lower the bar for, the Balkans, for example, enlargement countries, but it's actually to emphasize the value of these exercises per se, actually, to appreciate them besides that, because you have to consider that we have to come a long way into being involved and open, consultative processes, etc. So there is an actual democratic value in these actors, such as yourselves, putting these in place per se, and giving the citizens an opportunity to articulate their opinions. So again, it's not to lower the bar, but it's to appreciate that this work that is often still piloted, still, at its first times, etc. So I think we need to consider these nuances as well, and which is why I am a big proponent and insist in emphasizing the value of the exercise per se, regardless. And then it's a matter of moderating expectations. If you're clear that you're not aiming to change a law necessarily, but to voice the views of the citizens, to articulate them, then everything can be managed in terms of impact. Thank you. Over.
You want to come in? Very good. There you go.
I'll try to be short because I think time is running out, right? And I don't know, you want to take more questions. But I agree. I don't think there is too much participation. There are just too many processes done for the wrong reason. And those reasons are usually valid. I mean, communication is important in politics. You need transparency, but that is informing citizens. It's not co-creating with them. So let's just call a cat, as we say in French. The question of the follow-up is one indeed. I mean, you're nailing it. It's a bit frustration of mine. I think when just to go back also to the saturation, because it's linked to that, and that's how you introduce your question. Of course, it's a very good thing that people keep saying the same thing. Imagine if the French people were saying their mind every 3 months. They are changing their mind every 3 months, but on the important stuff, they are not. And that tells you something extremely powerful. Otherwise, it would be extremely easy for policymakers to say, oh no, you see, they're changing their mind, so because the method was flawed or because the sampling of people was not representative. So it says indeed something extremely powerful, and hence why I am also surprised that, I mean, I'm not going to say I'm the only one who have noticed, they always say the same thing, but I don't hear a lot of people in the public sphere noticing that and picking that up, to be honest. And if you look at the French Climate Assembly, I think it's a good example of eventually something that led to, you don't know, but there are researchers who said that more than 70% of the recommendation 4-5 years later have been implemented, partially or totally. But why have they been implemented? The political authority, the government, especially with all the troubles that they have, of course, didn't want to implement everything. But at some point, they were forced to, because there was so much push also from civil society, from the media, that the backlash of not doing it would have been worse than doing it. So it took them some time, but it took a lot of work from civil society, from the French media to push that agenda. And so the green NGOs in France have done a lot of lobbying, literally. And we go back to your question on lobbying. There is a role for what is lobbyists can use this as well. Citizens give their time, but they're not professional lobbyists. And at some point, there is a role for different people also in what we are trying to create here. And me, I see it in the European citizens panels. I see a lot of observers and lobbyists in citizen participation, but where are the sectorial actors? I have very little. It is a big frustration. On energy, there are a lot of recommendations on energy that are extremely interesting, I think, and are extremely aligned with a lot of people in the energy sector in the EU bubble are pushing for, and they're not there. I even wonder if they know that these things are going on. And it's a pity for everyone. We are all losing out by not using this, because I think they can be extraordinary, very powerful advocacy tools if you use them properly. And of course, the people who are organizing these, you, me, we have a responsibility, but we cannot do this alone. I need everyone, because we are just one actor. Yes. But even a DG, it's normal that they have also internal constraints, and they have it's politics, and sometimes you have counterpowers for that. So everybody needs to play their role. I would like to say.
Yeah. Well, you've only got one DG, so but I have worked in other ones in the past, so hopefully that counts. As a civil servant, yeah? So you're at the bottom, participation at the bottom, perhaps a European official, I wouldn't say top, but at the different end of the process. As a civil servant, I will do what I am told to by the Commission. The Commission will also respond to the elections and will respond to the European Parliament. So what has to be done is to find a bridge between public sentiment, public ideas, and politics. And that goes back to the point you made about lobbying, because if I can read your reports with interest, but until it turns into some kind of political signal that this is a priority, then I'm not going to do something because I'm not asked to, and the legitimacy is with the political people. So again, I ask myself, why is migration such a huge priority and environment less, when everything tells me environment is a priority, but it's not being translated into the current political mood. So that is a bridge to look at.
Sure. Can you take the microphone? Oh, yeah, but there. Okay.
I just wanted to say that, of course, I mean, as a civil servant, your job is to deliver the policies of the government in power, but at the same time you're a policymaker, and you should be also, I mean, civil servants should also be bringing advice to the decision makers as to which is the direction that the citizens would like policies to go. So it's actually not a one-way street, it's a two-way street, and I think that it is extremely important that these ideas also go from the bottom up towards the political leaders, because as we discussed in many of our countries, this link between the citizens and politicians is very weak, also because of the lack of democracy in the political parties.
And it's not just in the Balkans, it's everywhere, But I want to come back to the room in case there is like one or two questions. Yeah, very brief ones, just next to you.
Yes, I hate using these things, let's see if it works. Tim Helm, I'm on sabbatical from the European Parliament. I am a sort of civil servant, but I've had the privilege of being a political advisor, so I can actually express views privately to politicians. I can also draw on an example of a country that is no longer a member of the EU. And I think there's something to be said. You're talking about ones that are current members, you're talking about ones that hope to be, and I hope they all will be. I wouldn't ignore the ones that have left. At the moment, just one, unless you happen to look at Greenland. But look at what happened there. A lot of what you've been discussing about deliberation, about citizens' participation, information, it's important to learn what went wrong 10 years ago in my country. That would be the first thing. The second thing is I think the EU does have a clear role to play. It took a decision in the British referendum not to take part. I don't think it will take, God forbid there is another one in another country, but if there was, I think it will be taking part. But Ioanna, you made a point about, in your survey, going to visit bridges, things that are funded, and you said it wasn't important. Actually, it is important. What I think the EU is not doing well enough, partly because I don't think it relies upon the member states to do it on its behalf, and I can assure you that doesn't always happen, is to highlight where the EU plays a role. Those are local examples that are incredibly important to persuade people why it matters to them locally. In my home city of Liverpool, there wasn't enough of that going on, and we had problems in getting the information out of the EU. I hope that's changing, because you have to work bottom up. That's, I think, the message that has come through all of your conversations. Outside the bubble, bottom up, get people involved, get people to connect to the politics and get them to feel they can play a part. And the final thing I'd say is I hope everyone in this room who's been involved, if they're not involved with political parties or involved in campaigning, get involved. I appreciate that may be different cultures and different countries, but then try and change it. And remember, everyone in this room, you all are also consumers. Some of you will be shareholders individually or collectively through your pensions. There are many different ways you can be active and get your voice heard. But my final appeal is, I do hope the EU is looking at how to promote and accentuate local initiatives that can then be used by local campaigners, because unfortunately that was something we had a problem with in the British referendum, because our own government didn't wish to highlight it and wish to conceal it.
Thank you. I mean, that would be a good way to wrap it up. But I do want to come back to the panel for their just a very final half-a-minute closing remark linked to the call made to citizens, but also to reiterate this question of how do we create this political incentive for political signaling. You mentioned political signaling. How do you think we can instigate this this desire to for the political signaling to function more effectively? And maybe to some of those of you who are engaged in running such initiatives on a regular basis, how do we get unusual suspects in? Ioanna, you mentioned it, but this remains, I think, a difficult issue, because it's not only about getting politicians. We said it's also about getting citizens involved, but if it's always the same citizens, it's not necessarily good either. And talking about getting everybody involved, how do we get media involved? In this project, for example, did you receive any media attention to the work and to the findings? So a lot of things. Don't feel obliged to answer to everything. Cherry pick, and just very quick final remarks. I'll start in the opposite direction. Blerta, if you want to go first.
Thank you. I agree, I mean, with what you just said, what also the colleague from the audience just said. So I would just say, insist, continue, persevere, team up, be resourceful, be creative, partner. Thank you.
This is your message.
Okay. I would say lobby like professionals. It's easier said than done, but the other side are lobbying really like professionals. Google what happened to the due diligence directive and Exxon, and you will see that's what you're up against, because they can change your political agenda. And second thought is reach out beyond the usual suspects. And there's a lot of civil society which isn't political scientists, etc. An environment we've actually been engaging with faith-based organizations. Not traditionally people that the green movement would speak to, but they also and increasingly believe in protecting the environment for different reasons. So reach out as widely as possible to make the voice as loud as possible.
Yeah, it's funny that you mentioned that, because one of the unexpected follow-up I had from the European Students panels on hatred, which was my favorite one, hate in society. I had one participant who is completely apolitical, who does not take part in any political party, who is Czech, and who is handsome. Czech is pretty irreligious, atheist country, but more than France. I was very surprised when he told me, yeah, I went to my local church, I told this to my priest, and now we're having a little local debate in my little village in the middle of completely unexpected, kind of type of participation, which perhaps is not political, but it's still civic engagement. And that's why I wanted to go back to your question, scaling, what I call scaling deep participation, or creating this participation ethos. We perhaps need to accept that, especially for young people, you have the right perhaps not to want to be engaged in a political party, but being engaged in the social fabric of your sport club, your cultural association, helping refugees, whatever, that is taking part in the social fabric. And that's also what democracy is about. So there are different types of participation, and you should go to where your heart is. And if it's in church, in football or whatever, that's, lower a bit the pressure on everyone, and perhaps we would be better off.
The strength of this association is something that's been advised to us for a long time. Alex de Tocqueville and Putnam, Robert Putnam. Yeah.
Thank you. Also, thank you so much for your comments. I'm sorry, I forgot your name, sir. I also lived in the UK for 20 years, and now I've been in Greece for 3 years. And the parallels I see are terrifying. And it's much more easy to tell people the EU does nothing for you than it is to tell them, look at how much the EU is doing for you. So absolutely, very important. And I think my message would be, we've spoken a lot about policy follow-up. And I think, especially for young people, unfortunately, politicians will never be progressive enough for us. They will never be open-minded enough for us. They will never be left enough for us. But that is going to be disappointing, and that is going to make you feel disillusioned. But that's why you need to try more. And that's the reason why you need to infiltrate these spaces and try to get your voice out there. Yes, it's hard. Yes, it's disappointing. That's exactly the reason why we need to not give up in this process.
Great. I think that in Croatia, on national and local levels, all the initiatives and approaches toward more transparent government, good governance, participation, inclusion, consultation came exclusively from civil society organizations. So basically, not secret service, not civil servants. It would be great if it came more from the government. So we say we should try this, and there is a political will or not to do it, but I might be wrong. So maybe not 100% came from the civil society organization. The second thing, NGOs and civil society organizations quite often live within project cycles. And then at some point, project stops, just like REACH. And then you move on to another project, to a new methodology, to a new source of funding or something else. And that also makes it difficult for us to follow up on what we actually provided, and that's the thing for Rijeka. We said, okay, we did a great process, we learned a lot, you have 90 recommendations, you will accept more than half of them. There were 90% of those were not and will never be probably implemented in real life, but the recommendations, just like in REACH, are not just for the European Commission. It's not just for the mayor, for the particular civil servants. These are the recommendations that might be used by all actors that are interested in the topic that you are dealing with. But there always have to be someone to push the button, to pull the right lever, to move on. And we had to do it in the city of Rijeka. It was a tough project, We had a great cooperation, long-standing cooperation with the city of Rijeka, but we had to make a lot of phone calls, mails, and meetings in order to proceed in a 1 year long project. And finally, I think Camille, but probably all of us here understand that in the core of the methodology of deliberative processes is to bring to the table and to the room the unusual suspects, so the people that predominantly do not participate for any reason. And then we could talk about the incentives, the way how to approach them, how difficult and complex and expensive the process you want to be in order to get all the minorities, all the people with income problems or any other social demographic characteristics. And it's not easy, but it's doable. And it's great why we have so many great examples throughout Europe and in our countries as well.
Thank you so much. This only highlights that there's still a lot of work to be done on many fronts when it comes to citizen participation, but also to the topics that have been the focus of this particular project. And of course, it's a conversation that we hope to continue on a different occasion. But when it comes to the rule of law, we will continue the conversation in 15 minutes by looking at this topic from an official perspective. We have the chief special prosecutor from Albania, Altin Dumani, who will be joining us on stage. And so those who are interested in hearing the other side, its point of view on the rule of law topic, you are invited to stay with us. You're welcome to stay with us. In 15 minutes, we'll get that conversation started. But I want to thank our partners. I want to thank our brilliant speakers for their very, very interesting contributions today, and also to you for your active participation, and help me thank our panels and our partners today. Thank you very much. It's a wrap. Thank you so much. Really, really very much appreciate it. Very interesting insights, really.
Project.
Yeah, but I mean, like all of those projects, thank you.